our mission is just to help everyone, just to seal in their heart that God is true.
We'd like to welcome today our guests, Mr. and Mrs. Dennis and Sandi Zinchuck. How are you doing today?
We're good. How are you?
Doing great.
Doing great.
Awesome. So you all have been believers for more than 30 years. And I know you have some powerful testimonies of your start of your journey with Christ, but you're not going to share that today. So what testimonies are you going to share with us?
It's a new journey that we started with the Lord about almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
And so we figured we're in the midst of it. It was a good place to start and share. So we were going to the refuge at the time, and they always start the year with lunch, which is, they have a lot of speakers come in, and there's prayer and fasting, which Dennis and I were praying and fasting. And one of the speakers in particular just caught me, and his name was John Hanna. And I was completely captivated, and I wanted a new encounter with God after seeing him. Like, I want that. And we had been praying, joining the church with that 21 days. And so I was praying for that encounter. And we were involved in a home group, one of the refuges home groups, and we were there for a Super Bowl party. And this is again February 2018. And I had gone upstairs with another one of the ladies to look at something upstairs. And when we were coming down, she was in front of me. I lost my footing, and I fell down hardwood steps, quite a number of them, and went down on my back head first. And I was at the foot of the stairs. I must have been unconscious. And because when I woke up, Dennis was over me, and one of our friends was praying in the spirit, and the leaders of the group were a doctor and a nurse. So God had it perfectly orchestrated who he wanted there, because it was miraculous. Yes. So I didn't really know what was going on, and went with the EMS. And when I was on the way to the hospital, my brain just cleared up. I didn't really know what was going on, but all of a sudden I was able to answer the questions perfectly. And I found myself saying, this is my encounter. And I don't know why I was saying that, but for some reason I thought that God was beginning that encounter I'd been praying about. And I continued to say that in the ER and went through the testing. There was bleeding on the brain, so I went to ICU, but I had no fear. And the next morning, everything went well, and they released me. And I think the magnitude of what had happened, because the nurse said to me, people don't just leave ICU in one day. They stay there for a long time. They go to another long-term care facility, or they don't come out. And there was also another man in ICU that had done the same thing, fallen down steps, same age as I was. He broke his back, and he was unconscious still. So when I got home, I think the magnitude of God's love for me and protection for me was overwhelming. And although there were months of recuperation during that time, and you were part of that, and a lot of people have heard this part of my testimony, but it goes on from here. And God gave me a word during that time of recuperation, because I had a lot of time to listen to him. I really developed an ear to hear his voice better than I ever had. And he said, the word was protection, that I'm going to protect you. And I had such a growth in my faith, because I know that I could have broke my neck, I could have had brain damage. And it was like he just picked me up and carried me down the steps and laid me down there, although there was a lot more to it than that. But it was just a time of just being thankful to God. And I didn't really understand what that whole encounter meant. So we're going to go on with this was the beginning of my encounter with God. So,
So Dennis, when Sandi fell, how did that affect you?
Well, like any husband, or we have a tendency to want to protect. Usually when you're falling down a flight of stairs, you end up at the bottom of the stair, sort of mangled in a weird position.
Mhm.
Well, she was laying there like someone had placed her.
Mm.
I mean, her arms were at her side. She was perfectly flat. Her head wasn't off to one side or anything. She was like she had been laid
Mm.
there. I'm looking at her, and God says to me, I got this.
Mm.
I got this.
Mhm.
And so I'm going, well, okay, Lord, what do you mean you got it? And he says, just don't worry about it. I know exactly what's going on. Everything is 100% under control. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. Just flow with this thing.
Okay.
And so here's your wife. You know that she's unconscious. Okay. I see her unconscious at this time. And this is going through your head, and you're thinking about, I'm helpless.
Mm.
I want to protect. I want to do something,
Mhm.
but I can't do anything.
Mm.
But God has all the people necessary taking care of everything.
Mhm.
The phone call's been made, a doctor's there, a nurse is there.
Mhm.
Okay, they're saying don't do this. The ambulance gets there.
Mm.
She's fading in and out during this time. Okay. While this is happening, and to move past this moment, then God had been dealing with something in my heart.
Mhm.
Okay, and it was really deep. And the reason why I brought up the word protecting, is sometimes us husbands get stuff from the Lord, but we don't want to share it with our spouses because we're fearful. Okay, so for about approximately a year prior to this, the Lord had been sharing with me, son, I really want you and Sandy to leave your secure life.
Mm.
I want you to sell your home.
Mm.
I want you to become debt free. I want you to find a piece of land that you and Sandy have always dreamed about, buy it and build.
Mm.
I want you to downsize. You're in 2-story. I want you to go to 1-story. You're getting older. And all of these things. And so some of this stuff is going on in my head. And now we're back from the hospital. She's at home, very sensitive to sound and all that. So everything, you have to be really careful.
Mhm.
And this is going on in my head. And God's like got this loudspeaker going. Are you going to share with her?
Mm.
She said she wanted an encounter. She has her encounter. I've sort of woke her up. I'm waking you up. Do
Mhm.
you have the boldness to share what I have been sharing with you, God is saying to me,
Mhm.
over the last year? You haven't said anything yet, and a whole year's gone by, and we've been discussing this,
Mhm.
okay? But
Mhm.
you won't say anything.
Mm.
So all of this is going on in my head. And so I think it was another month rolled by,
Mm-hmm.
and I finally share it with her.
Okay.
She then says, well, I've been praying for an encounter,
Mhm.
and maybe this is just what we're supposed to do. So we start praying over it as a couple. Next thing you know, we're on the road traveling approximately 3,000 miles going up and down the Blue Ridge, zigzagging it. We find a piece of property. We put our house up for sale. It sells very quickly.
Mhm.
We buy the property.
With the purchase of the property, I'm not usually the vocal one, he is, but I said, offer this for the land, which was way below the price. I said, and I did not waver. And again, I'm still, pumped on faith because God had saved me from death, right?
Mhm.
So, and I'm like, offer this. And we offered that, and they said, okay.
Okay, which was also interesting was because we put in the offer, we didn't hear anything for 2 months. Anyway, so we get the land, and soon as we get up there, all of a sudden, obstacle
Mhm.
after obstacle after obstacle happens. What ended up happening is in this area, we bought Meadows of Dan, Virginia, right off the Blue Ridge, 20 miles east of I-77, and where we bought had rain unbelievable, stopping all building processes, okay? The land was soaked, it was drenched, so you really couldn't do anything. Okay. We didn't really know some of the builders and all of that kind of stuff. So we're trying to make all these connections, and we actually make some decisions, and we make some bad decisions. We listen to some advice that we should never have been listening to in the first place, because God had already told us what to do, how to do it, but we tried to apply our wisdom.
Yep.
And what we ended up doing was making foolish mistakes. We overspent. Free. So all of a sudden we find ourselves with the rain renting longer while we're building, which I'll throw this in right now. We're still renting, and it's over a year later. And by the way, I'm the builder.
Oh, yes.
No, by the way, we're the builder.
True. Okay. I end up finding out I have a medical condition which puts me in the hospital. Okay? So after I get out of the hospital, then I have to go back to the hospital for another procedure, which slows everything down and takes some of my strength away and all of that. So how did her falling down the stairs, it gave me the encouragement to look at my wife and say, honey, God's been dealing with me with something, and that's about, we're at the stage of life where we're supposed to be making some changes, and I, as your husband, believe that God is speaking, but I want unity between us. Mm-hmm. So what he was speaking to me is, do you have enough faith to trust me, my son? Mm. Do you love me enough? Do you believe in my word enough that I got this for you? Okay, and so I got to admit, I did and I didn't. But when she fell down the stairs, he said, I already showed you how I'm going to provide for that. And he did. Mm-hmm. Now, will you trust me with the rest? Mm. Okay. My wife reminded me, I got a word, okay, in my hospitalization process. So she got a word in her hospitalization process, okay, and it was trust and protect. Mm-hmm. I got a word empty. And God says, I want you to empty you of you. Okay? Now, my condition was a bladder condition. Okay? And my bladder was filling up with excessive amounts. Okay? And it was not releasing. In the process, he says, I need to empty you, and I'm giving you a word picture. Okay? And because of that, I had to wear a Foley for a while. After the surgery, he gave me another word, okay? And it was, I want you to continue to empty yourself. Okay? And he did that by giving me another literal. The first one was that my bladder had to be emptied, and I had to be on a Foley for a while. The other one was I had to continue to empty myself, and that is I had to partially self-cap myself. Okay? Which is a visual reminder, like drilling in the point. God saying, if you have you in you, then where am I?
Yes. Well, that's a very interesting point. That's very deep, Dennis, very deep. But Sandy, so let me go back a little bit. So you all sold your house, and you left the church here at the refuge, went to the mountains. And now you're in the mountains, and you're saying that the winter was very rough and you weren't able to build. And then when you're ready to build, then Dennis has to go to the hospital and go through surgery. How did that affect you with everything that you were going through?
My faith that I had at the beginning of the journey was way down. I'll just say that it's been a pruning process, because I realized God showed both of us, but probably me more so, of how spoiled I was. Because when you don't have a church family, your friends, you don't have your family close by, you don't have, all your stuff is in storage and you're renting, and you see your money, everything that you budgeted out is not there, and God is saying, look at me. Don't look at your circumstances. The visual of Peter walking on the water really was something I kept going back to, is that if I look at my circumstances, I sink, and I did sink, and I'd call friends, and but what God really did was just he created a greater intimacy between the two of us, and he kept giving me these downloads from him that I could just write out, and so I just would write. And that's part of what Dennis will share shortly. But one thing Dennis said to me in the hospital, and that's when my fear peaked, because I was at the hospital by myself with no one. I was fearful because
During my stay.
Yeah, during his stay. And when he got the word empty, and just like we've heard it say, when your husband suffers, you suffer, and vice versa, the word was for me too. And the emptiness the thing that I needed to empty was my fear and doubt, which was peaked, because if something happened to Dennis, what was I going to do? There was no house. Who was I going to live with? What is it? I was just, if my mind was racing. And then Dennis looked at me in the hospital bed, and he said, God just put the two words he gave both of us together. I will provide for you if you empty yourself. So I'm like, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized that the fear and the doubt had to go.
So that's very interesting, because God does his part, and then there's another part that has to be done, which is our part. And a lot of people miss that part, miss that hinge. I will do this if you're obedient, if you listen to what I said, if. And so a lot of people don't realize that there's an action behind every declaration. If you're going to get rid of fear and doubt, if you have to get rid of those things to move forward. The Lord's always there with you. He's never going to leave you. But if you want to continue forward with him, he'll do his part. He's always going to do his part. But there's always our part that sometimes we forget to do. So that's very interesting that you realized in that moment with Dennis that there's a portion there where you recognize fear and doubt, and your circumstances were all coming together, it's all gathering around you, and you're wondering, is Dennis going to make it out of the hospital? And if so, or if not, what's going to happen to you? And that's, like you said with Peter, walking the water. That's looking at our circumstances. And there's so many times that we look at our circumstances and we limit God. We think that, our circumstances are so big that God can't. It's like, who made the universe? Who made, everything? And we sometimes put him up there and think that, yeah, this might be a little too much for you, God. He always says it's never too much for me. So back with you, Dennis.
Yes.
So with all the rain and then the harsh winter, and then when you're about ready to build, now you can't because you're in the hospital. What happened next?
Well, the amazing thing is we did get our first building up, okay, which is a workshop, 800 square foot workshop that we actually can produce a revenue off of. Was we build furniture out of it, custom farmhouse furniture. So God immediately allowed us to get that before the winter set in and during all the inclement weather. And so God said, do you really trust me, son? Because I'm thinking as a guy, all right, our revenue's down. We're driving two and a half hours back down to Charlotte. We're finding a new church up in Virginia. We're trying to make new friends, but we have a lot of friends here. So we're doing a lot of traveling and stuff like that. And God says, have you lost sight of what I've asked you to do?
Oh, okay.
Okay? Because like she said, her faith began to wane. Even though we started out on this high,
Yes.
now all of a sudden, through trials and tribulation, God says, are you recounting the blessings I have given you? Okay, so I just want to share a few of those. And I wrote a few of them down here. Okay, he's saying, are you praising me that you're hearing me better? Are you praising me because I've given you time to pray more?
Yes.
Or are you complaining about your extra time to pray? Okay? Because you should be doing something else instead of praying. And you're justifying, oh, it's just praying. Just praying?
Mm.
Prayer moves mountains.
Yes.
Okay?
Mountains,
So
yeah.
perspective is beginning to come in. He's saying, do you realize that you've had several visitors come up and spend time up here with you? And you and Mark,
Yes.
okay, even came up, okay? And he's saying, isn't there beauty in that? Do you really appreciate that, son? And so I'm beginning to share this stuff back and forth with Sandy, and we're talking about it. He goes on to say, are you praising me for dying to the flesh?
Okay.
When you were back and living in Cornelius in the Charlotte area, you know, you had all these beautiful things. Nice house, nice furnishings, all these things. And he's saying, are you praising me? Because even though you don't have some of them now, like your house isn't built.
You're in the process, yes.
Okay? Are you going to praise me and thank me even though you don't have it? Thank you for the house, Lord, you're building.
Yes.
Thank you, Father, for the resurrection of that. Thank you for all the provisions. Thank you for the help. Thank you for the design ideas. Okay? Thank you for telling us to move that window and put in a door or whatever. Are you thanking me for that? Are you praising me? So he's taking these little tiny things and he's saying, son, do you get what's going on? And we're sharing the stuff back and forth. Okay, he resurrects, and she mentioned earlier, blogging. She started to write again because she is a prolific writer. She can write, and she can put forth a story, okay, and a principle in writing. And so she's writing, and she has time to do it. Okay, back when we lived here, she didn't have time to do it. Okay, then on top of that, he's resurrecting in me a ministry that I had initially started many years ago, okay? And he's saying to me, you need to start some of that writing you used to do with your ministry. And so here's me thinking, oh, who am I next to her, okay? But she's a good writer. I'm really not a good writer. I'm not called to do that. But the interesting thing is I'm writing and people are reading and it's getting the saints of God, they're being edified, okay? And he's saying, are you praising me for this? He's saying, are you looking at my timeline?
Not yours, yes.
Not Dennis's, not Sandy's. So the blessings are pouring down, and he's saying, son, do you have ears? Are you listening? Sandy, do you have ears? Are you listening? Look at my blessings, okay? And he's saying, are you looking beyond what you don't see? Okay? Because one of the things we did not share thus far, when we bought the land, he rekindled a vision in us that started back in 07, 08, right before the economy collapsed. We were going to start a refreshment ministry that we believed at that time was a ministry where people could go to in church leadership and business leadership who needed a place to go and be refreshed and restored and then go back. So when we began to find and look at land, she could see cottages, refreshment cottages over there. I could see them. Okay? And God was saying, you can use this land for my glory.
Yes.
And he's now reminding us after about 8 months of discouragement. And he's saying, did you lose the vision? See, what I spoke way back there in 07, 08, that wasn't the timeline for you to do it then. I stopped you in your tracks. The beautiful part is this. I'm now giving you a place to do it. And then he says, and so what's the common thing? Well, Lord, we're short on money already. All right, we're overspending on rent and all this stuff that's taking all this extra money. Okay? And so what he says, what do you got to work with? So he says to me, he says, why don't you do phase 1 first? Okay, and phase 1 is you and Sandy have left Charlotte to downsize to focus on family and ministry. You got caught up in fear and doubt. Okay? You lost sight of why I called you. And so our testimony is he's saying, I got this. See, I have something much bigger, and you're in the already not yet. It's not yet, but it is already. Because I have it coming to take place, even though it is not. Seeing things as that are not as though they were.
Right.
Hebrews 11:1.
Like
Okay.
scriptures you'd like to share with us that have really given you a foundation throughout this process. I'll start with you, Sandy.
I don't know the scriptures by heart, so I'm going to have to look at them.
Okay.
But I do know that the theme of all of them were wait and take courage, which I didn't have much of.
What she does have a lot of courage, but she downplays it. Because to make this journey, you would have to have a lot of courage.
Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, wait for the Lord. And for the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens towards the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it certainly will come. It will not delay.
Yes, patience.
And of course, the Peter walking on the water, oh, you of little faith. And you know that your Lord is looking at you and saying that to you. He said that to me many times, you of little faith. I had to keep reminding myself to look up and keep my eyes locked on his. So,
And in connection with that, one of mine is Hebrews 4:16. And I mean, he just beat this on me. He just over and over. And it reads like this. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence.
Yes.
Approaching the throne of grace with confidence. So that you may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for coming on our show today and sharing all the things that the Lord is doing in your life. I look forward to hearing more about what God is doing further on. Well, that's it for Testify today. We thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye. Please follow us on www.touchandtestimony.org or find us on social media.